Hello, welcome back to my witch obsession. If you're seeing this, this will be books I've read in late June throughout July. So this is technically the books I read throughout July, and I didn't realize how many I've actually read. So yeah, we have a lot to go through. I'm gonna break up this video in chunks so it's easier to navigate, because what I want to do is I want to go through each book. And by the way, spoiler warning, if you don't want spoilers, or if you, because I'm going to talk about these books and explain how I felt and my experience, what I learned, what I liked, what I didn't like, so it's going to require me to spoil the book, so spoiler warning. And I'm going to break up this video into chunks, like I said, so that if there's a specific book that you're interested in, I will put the timestamps in the description box. So if there's a specific book that catches your eye, I'll have it labeled down. So I'll just label the books by name in the description box so that I don't have to go through each one. So there's not going to be a specific order. I'm not going to label these by which book I've read, like, in chronological. It's just going to be random fire. So I will see you at the thing. So the first book that I'll go through is The Hoodie Girl. This is by Yuen, Wright. I think that's how you pronounce their name. And this is teen or young adult reading. Apparently it's teen fiction. So it's teen fiction. I read this book back in 8th grade on Wattpad, and essentially the plot of the story is obviously a couple, and they have both gone through a lot, and this is a really slow burn. And if I had to be honest, the intimacy and romance, they're teenagers, so it's not completely based in physical activity, if you know what I'm saying. And so they don't even smooch each other until like the 200th page, over half the book. This book is around, it's almost 300 pages. I like books that are around that threshold, like 200 to 300. Any more and I kind of get bored. But yeah, it drags. It really drags. And the book takes a lot of time to explain the characters, who they are. The protagonists, their names are Asher and Ren. Ren is the girl, Asher's the boy. And I feel like I went into this book wanting romance and wanting the cheesy stuff, but I came out really appreciating how much the characters have changed, how much they came out of their shells, and how much they embraced new identities and basically molted in order to make the relationship work and make it, to show up for each other, but also themselves. And I feel like it was just really beautiful, and I really liked that. And I was pretty alarmed because I just remember this book being kind of like, I thought it was kind of like cringy, and I thought it was kind of like, I thought it, because it's a Wattpad book, so I was kind of like, oh, it's about to be getting Wattpad. And it most certainly gave that, but it was very polished. And Ren basically went through a terrible car accident, and she lost her dad and her sister, her little sister. And so it was just her and her mom, and their relationship was very genuine. It was very sweet, and you could tell that they were both exhausted and that they carry that grief with them every single day. And it manifested in their relationship. And the whole plot, or like the whole point, the hoodie girl, she wore this red hoodie throughout the book, and she always had it on. And it was like her comfort zone. Every time she was out, she was wearing it. It was red. And so the end of the book, the hoodie is a huge metaphor, because at the end of the book, as Ren and Asher are together, Asher wants her to burn the book. So, or not the book, the hoodie. So they're like standing by a campfire or whatever, and he's like, oh, burn it. And then she's like, are you crazy? And then he's like, well, it's your comfort zone. You keep clinging on to your comfort zone, and if you keep doing that, you're not going to change, you're not going to grow, your relationships aren't going to improve. And I feel like it was, obviously at that point, he was not talking about just the hoodie, he was talking about a lot of other things. And yeah, I really liked it, and it really made me think a lot about myself, in the sense that I feel like not only do I do that, cling to my comfort zone, but I also feel like it was this vibe of opening up to relationships, and how it doesn't take healed people to form a healthy and meaningful connection. And that was just really nice to read, because I feel like oftentimes we assume that we should be completely fixed or well in order to participate in a relationship, but these two really showed up for each other in the ways that counted, and even dealt with each other when they were being really frustrating, and they were both willing to face their fears to make not only their personal lives work, but also the connection work. And it just made me feel so, it made me feel hopeful, but it also made me feel just kind of like more human. I don't know, there's just something that's very human about this book. Asher plays hockey, and it was funny because one of the characters' names is Mia, and I have a real life friend that has that name, and then she was telling me about hockey one day. I was like, I just read a book recently. But Asher plays hockey, and he gets into this really big injury because of this other guy named Drew, and Asher like identifies with playing hockey, you know, like that's his whole gig. And so when he gets injured for pretty much the whole book, he's not able to play, and he finds out that his hockey team and the people around him only really flocked around him just because he was good at something and because he had some sort of a reputation. And so when he got injured, he really realized who was really there for him and who really stuck by his side, whereas Ren was just kind of like, you know, she stuck by him and she was willing to help him and be there for him. And he felt very drawn to that. He felt very connected to that, you know, like this person wants to be with you because you're a person, not because it's something that you bring to the table. But the whole reason that they kind of get mushed together is because Asher has a little sister, and Ren was babysitting her, and she was getting paid money for it. So that was kind of like how they got nudged together, if you know what I'm saying. I think I feel like it was obviously focused on Ren and her character development. I feel like Ash's was a little bit more stripped back, or it was a little bit more like, oh, let's just throw it together. But it definitely all made sense, and it was all cohesive, and it didn't ever feel like they were diverting away from each other. But yeah, if you're wanting like the Ushi-Gushi stuff, I would not recommend this book. This book is kind of heavy at times. But yeah, that's this book. Okay, sticking to romance, another book that I read, this is a book I reread. This is The Wedding Date by Jasmine Guillory. Y'all, my favorite romance novel author, Jasmine Guillory. She is so tea. I personally feel like her books are so joyful. They definitely have that vibe of being like, you know, things work out. This is contemporary romance, so, you know, there's that happily ever after vibe, and I loved it. Oh my gosh, this entire series makes me so happy. The wedding date, the proposal, which I'll show you in a little bit, the wedding party, all of it. I love her books, and I really want to get more of them. I have a few of them, and they're my absolute favorite, but this was the first book I ever read from Jasmine Guillory because it was red and it stuck out to me. The protagonist names are Alexa and Drew, and the reason why I really like Jasmine Guillory's romance novels in particular, I don't really like to talk about this very often because I feel like it can be interpreted the wrong way, but me personally, the couples are usually always interracial, and the way that dynamic is explored is it feels very genuine, and it feels like a conversation that's very uncomfortable, but it's had, you know, and it feels very bold, and the way she talks about it is it's very real life in my opinion. And so Alexa is black and Drew is white, and there's several moments where Drew has to learn about her world and the world that she grew up in. You know, she's a black woman and she works in politics, and you know, there's parts where they're going to an event together and Alexa's like, Drew, are there going to be black people there, or are we just going to like your only white families, you know, whatever, I forgot what it was, but like a wedding or something, you know, like the whole point of the book. And he's like, oh, like, why is that important? You know, why is that such a big deal? And, you know, typical response, but you can tell that the way it's told, she's not antagonizing Drew. It's not his fault. And it's just kind of, the conversation's just had so nicely. And it's a nice moment to educate him and the person reading the book, you know, because it's like a real life thing where people want to see people who look like them. And that's why I just really like it. And I really hope that one day she writes a book that involves an Asian person. But the whole point of the book and how it kind of gets kicked off is that Alexa and Drew are strangers, and they both go to the same hotel for different reasons. Drew goes to visit someone, and Alexa's visiting her sister, and they're in the elevator and they get stuck in it, and then they turn around, they're like, oh my gosh, we're stuck in this elevator. You know, they're strangers at this point, and then they spend time together, and then Drew's like, oh, I have to go to this wedding party and I really don't want to go, and yeah, can you please be my date so I don't have to go alone because my date bailed on me. So that's kind of how things get going, and Drew's kind of known to be a player. He's a little bit flaky and really bad with commitment, so I'm sure you can imagine how this plays out throughout the book. And I really like the side things that Jasmine Guillory incorporates, and it makes the connection feel a lot more meaningful, because I don't really remember much about Drew once again, but Alexa's character is really deep because her relationship with her sister is very much discussed throughout the book, and there's a lot of tension there. And I'm not gonna lie, y'all, I'll be crying when I be reading the ending because, you know, Alexa, she has this project that means a lot to her, and she talks about how her sister had some bad opportunities, or like her sister got robbed of opportunities because she made some bad decisions in high school. And this was another point where she talked about it. She was like, you know, like, she talked to Drew and she was like, oh, like, I really want to do this project for teens that they can participate in order to explore other parts of themselves, you know, like to dive into the arts, creativity, doing stuff that is fun, community-based, and they can hopefully turn around their life and look to other things and other ways of living that is ethical, instead of being around people who thrive on violence, who thrive on things that are not appropriate, you know, like teens getting into delinquent activities. And she talks about how much it means to her because her sister got into trouble in high school, and she told Drew, she was like, well, like, Drew, if you were a white man, if you did something like what she did in high school, her sister had broken into a school to just like mess around. She was like, Drew, if you did that, like, you would have just gotten a slap on the wrist and moved on. Olivia had her whole life, I don't know if I mentioned it, but her sister's name is Olivia. You know, her sister, like, she got punished for it, and she had to work really hard to turn her life around. And then throughout the book, you know, the ending is Alexa, such spoilers, I know, but Alexa goes through with the project and everyone approves. She has to fight and she makes it work. And, you know, the end of the book, not only does she repair her relationship with Drew, because Drew's bad of commitment and he tries like running away, and then, or like, Alexa finds out about his dating history and she's like, girl, like, I'm not dealing with you no more. And then Drew's like, what the heck? And then, you know, Alexa's like, they're both like, why is this happening to me? And then Drew's friend Carlos, which you're gonna see in another book, he's like, girl, like, you need to go get her. You know, what are you doing? You love her, go get her. So he go gets her, and he shows up to the event that Alexa is hosting in order to announce her project or to advocate for it. And at that event, Olivia is also there as a secret guest, and Drew and Olivia meet each other, and then they, like, you know, like, happy ending from there on out, because Alexa gets her way, her sister's there supporting her, and Drew's there also supporting her. It was just really beautiful, and seeing how these very complex emotional topics work out, it's just very liberating. I love that for her. One of my favorite books, I think that this is a slower read because the problems that go on in the book, or, you know, like, not the problems as in like there's something wrong with the book, but the issues that the protagonist faced, it's very heavy and very emotional. It's very real, and you do feel the difficulty that they're going through when it comes to having the right conversations in order to emotionally liberate themselves and have those revelations. But it's just so good. I love it. I love it. They also, like, sleep a lot, if you know what I'm saying. Yeah, that. So that's The Wedding Day. I highly recommend this book. I don't know why I'd recommend it after I just spoiled it all, but that's what we're gonna be doing for the rest of the video. So yeah, that was The Wedding Date. All right, so the next book is The Proposal, which is also by Jasmine Guillory. And girl, this one's my favorite book. This is my favorite romance novel of all time. Point blank, period. All time. I don't even have to think about it. If you ask me, what's your favorite romance novel of all? The Proposal. The Proposal. I love this book so much. And I feel like I love it so much because I love the characters. Nick, so it goes, I think her name's Nicole. Yeah, her name's Nicole and Carlos. Carlos is Drew's friend. So he's from Like, this is his book, and oh my gosh, I love Nicole so much. The romance and the plot line is a little bit kind of like, you know, it's kind of like, it's bold, and but Nick's character is enough to have me coming back every single time. She's like prickly and she's like abrasive and she's really sarcastic, but she's also really considerate. And when the situation gets really emotional, she gets like anxious, you know, because she herself is not that much of an emotional person, but there are situations where she does feel, and I love it. So the whole point, the whole title, the proposal, basically what happens is that these two are both at the same, what's the Dodgers game. They're strangers at this point, but excuse me, they are both there, and Nick's there with her hookup, who is ironically named Justin. So they've been dating for like 5 months, and nothing about it was inherently serious, but Justin 5 months in proposes to her at the Dodgers game, and there she's like on the billboard. She's like on the big, I don't know how Dodgers games works, but she's on the big screen, and she's like, we've not had this conversation, you know, like what's going on? So she pretty much rejects him, and everyone's like, you know how the world reacts when someone says no to a proposal. And so everyone's like, what the? And Carlos is there, and he's like, girl, we need to save her. So he's there with his sister Angela. They go through with it, and then I forgot his cousin's name. I think his cousin's name is Jesse. And so after that save, they go through with it, you know, they go to the bar together, you know, and then Carlos meets Nick's friends. Nick's friends are Courtney and Dana. And throughout the book, we get a little taste because Nick goes to a self-defense class because Nick's like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of nervous because, you know, like I just rejected this man and who knows what he's going to do to me. And so she takes a self-defense class, and she ends up meeting the person that runs the gym. Her name's Natalie, and I love Natalie's lore, and I love how Jasmine took the time to explore Natalie's lore and how she went through a horrible marriage. It was giving Liars by Sarah Manguso. I'll tell you all about that book in a little bit. And it was just like it was a tragedy. Natalie's story was a tragedy, but she took that tragedy and she empowered herself, where after being in a marriage where she was unhappy and she was making sacrifice after sacrifice and changing herself because she thought that that's what you're supposed to do, she opens up her own gym and she follows her dreams. And there's just something that was very genuine and very heartfelt about that. And Nick decides to write about it because she's a freelance writer, so she writes about it. Carlos's cousin Jessie is pregnant, and she has birth complications. I don't remember the name of it, but she has birth complications. And basically the whole book is that anticipation. And then they're both keeping it casual, you know, Carlos and Nick. And then there is just a certain point where Carlos is like, I'm in love with you. Like, very suddenly. Like, they literally wake up and he's like, I'm in love with you. And then she's like, you know, maybe sleep it off. We don't need to be doing all this. Which is so what I would do. If I was sleeping with someone casually and then they dropped the L-bomb on me one morning, I'd be like, King, I'll forgive you. It just happens to the best of us. You don't need to be doing all that. You just need a little bit more sleep. Okay, let's go back to bed. And you know, he feels very invalidated by that, and you can only imagine what the book turns into. And he gets all mad. They break up, and then she's like, y'all, like, why he have to go and ruin all that? Carlos is all like, man, this is the worst time of my life. Like, I'm gonna have trouble forgetting her. Like, I'm so angry. And then Nick is like, she's just like, whatever. And then there's a certain point where she's like, yo, I do love this man. Like, I want to be with him. What am I doing? And then her friends are like, girl, that's what you should be doing. So we're going to help you. And so she gets into contact with his sister, Angela. And then she like does a little thing. She is so cute because she goes to his house and she like sets up balloons and stuff. Like, you know, will you be my whatever, my boyfriend or something? I forgot. And it was kind of like she had a thing going of the Dodgers stadium on his TV, so it was kind of like replicating what happened to her in the beginning of the book, and it was just like a full circle kind of moment. And Nick meets Drew and Alexa, and I love Nick's relationship with Alexa. I would so read a book where they're just friends and they're just talking smack and gossiping about their boo things. I would love to read because I love their dynamic. because when they meet each other, they go to the bathroom because they're at dinner together. So it was Carlos, Drew, Nick, and Alexa, and they go to a restaurant together. And Nick and Alexa go to the bathroom, and then they look at each other in the mirror, and they're like, "Girl, they didn't tell me you're black." And then they're like laughing in the bathroom, chatting it up, and they're like, "Well, girl, like now I don't have to worry about it. I was so nervous meeting you because I thought I was gonna meet some like white people and." No hate towards white people, but it's just like, you know, it's just like they were mentally prepared for something completely different because Nick knew that Drew was white. So it's like, you know, that was really cute. And I don't know, I love this book specifically because of her. She makes the whole book for me, and I love that. I love that for the culture. And I also want to note that Carlos is he's Mexican, and I was pretty alarmed and pretty heartfelt by how Jasmine writes about his obligations and feelings as a Mexican man. You know, the way she put it down was pretty accurate with what with the culture and whatnot, and without it being inherently like stereotypical or like offensive or like generic, it felt very heartfelt, and it felt like a really genuine, realistic interpretation of how like these people live in their culture, at least from what I perceived as someone who lives with a Mexican person, like, you know, is always around them and whatnot. So that was very nice. I really like that. So that's my opinion. Anyways, that's the proposal. Okay, so the next book is It Started With a Dog by Julia London. I'm not even gonna lie, y'all, I got some ice cream because it is so hot in my room, so I'm gonna be eating it throughout this one. So this is another romance novel. It's the last one I read, and I've been reading this since like 2023. I don't know what happened, but when I started reading this book, I had gotten so out of reading. I was no longer interested in reading, or I just didn't have the time, and it was really hard to get myself to read, period. And I feel like because I also stopped reading, I just got worse at reading. You know what I'm saying? So I was illiterate. I couldn't sit down and read, but I just got around to finishing it and reading like the last 100 pages of the book. And I have to say, Julia London wrote this other book called You Lucky Dog, and I like that one better than this one. I felt like this one was slow, y'all. This whole book felt like a drag to me, and it's not bad. It was a good book. It was just another one of those books where I feel like it was very realistic with how sometimes romance is really slow, and how sometimes it can just take a really long time before things can work out. Because there was a lot of ongoing issues in the book, because it's Jonah and Harper, which, by the way, I love that name, Harper. Jonah's family owns this cafe called the Lucky Star, and Harper is a corporate worker for this person. What was his name? Seren? And she is responsible for opening up Deja Brew, which is a coffee shop literally right across from Jonah's Lucky Star. And the whole book basically explores their relationship together while also being business enemies. And it's a little bit tense, and it's very delicate. I don't know how Julia wrote that without it being very... Because if I found out my boo thing was, you know, like my business enemy, I bet you're going down. And I just... It was a lot. It was a lot to keep up with. I'm not gonna lie. I should not do this because I have a rug here. So, the romance itself, it was a little bit difficult because Harper is also not a very emotional person. Neither of them really are, because they're both corporate and work savvy. Jonah, before he was helping his family with the Star, he was an aerospace engineer, I believe, and he had a whole thing going on with NASA, and his dad has cancer, so it's kind of one of those things where it's like, is he gonna stay with the Star, help them, or is he gonna go follow his dreams, do what he wants? And there is an opportunity for him to work and go to Spain. I forgot what it is. Barcelona? I don't know if it's Barcelona. Is Barcelona in Spain, y'all? But, you know, there's an opportunity to go to Spain, for 6 months. And because of that, the relationship's kind of tense because they're like, I don't know, 6 months is a long time. A lot can happen. What if you meet people and whatnot? And so you, as the reader, kind of go through the whole book knowing that they have to make decisions. Things have to be done. And you're just like, are they gonna break up? Are they gonna leave each other? But like, this is contemporary romance, so you're like, you know, it's gonna work out, but like, how does it work out? You know, and it was just a lot. And the reason for the name, it started with dog, is because Jonah has this giant white dog. I forgot what the breed was. I think it was a Labrador. I don't remember what it was. And Harper had this dog named Bob, and I love Bob. The whole reason they met was because they were both getting off the airport and they were taking a shuttle and they mixed up each other's phones. So they had each other's phones for a while. And so that's how they got into contact and how they met each other. And which is a pretty cute way to meet each other, I'm not gonna lie. So I'm about to go to the airport every single day now just to see if that will happen. Just kidding. And Harper volunteered at a dog shelter because she was too busy to actually keep a dog, but she really wanted to have a dog or like, you know, witness a dog. So she'd go to the shelter and walk dogs, and that was kind of her charity work. And then Jonah just had a dog. So, but near the end, they're like, oh, you know, like, how can we do like adoption for Bob? And then she's like, I'll adopt him. I'm gonna take that dog. Give me that dog. You know, I'm not letting him go. You know, she had grown attached to him, and it was really sweet. And Harper and Bob's relationship is so funny because they both obviously struggle with intimacy but allow it. And at the end, they also adopt this dog named Lulu. There's just a lot going on in this book, y'all. And a lot of it is sometimes does not have to do with the romance, because they're in like this King Mutt competition that requires votes, and they're sponsoring a dog. There's that going on, and then they're trying to do each other's business. Harper's going stuff for a boss, and then there's this other person named Kendall, and they're trying to ramp up business. Near the end, they start succeeding, and Kendall's in charge of Deja Brew, and it's just like so much going on at one time, and not a lot of it had to do with the romance and the relationship. It all was very relevant to their character, and you get a vivid idea of how they are. And I feel like this was necessary because the intimacy between each other was not that deep, or it wasn't that intimate, you know, aside from like the making of children. That aside from that, they weren't very intimate, I feel. And even when they were, it still felt something like was a little bit like they're not going to a certain depth, and it was a little shallow at times, and that's not bad. But I feel like the rest of the book just describes about them as people, and then you get a feel for who they are. And it's just like it feels like a real-time kind of book in the sense that things aren't rushed, and I do appreciate that. But my goodness, does that sometimes make it a drag. You know, these pages are thick. You know, this book is like 300 pages, so there's a lot going on. It was almost halfway to 400, so you can imagine how I was very discouraged from finishing this book. But now that I finished it, I'm like, okay, I'm glad I did it. I really liked it. Would I reread it? Probably not. So that was It Started With a Dog. So the next book is Liars by Sarah Manguso. Girl, this book was a ride and a half. Y'all, it's a little bit disappointing because I feel like if I was a woman reading this book, my brain would be like, yeah, girl, like, that happens all the time. You know, that's like, you know, dare I say, if I was like a more traditional person, say like a traditional woman reading this book, I'd be like, yeah, girl, like, you did everything right. That just happens. And this book is frustrating. It is so frustrating. There is the conclusion and the ending is only happy just because it is an ending, you know. And I'm gonna just say right now, even though I described this book to you in detail, nothing compares to actually reading it. Because when I watched a video on this book, it was from Mave Samar. She was describing this book, and I was like, okay, yeah, like, I see what the book is about. But reading it, I'm like, oh my god. Because the premise of the book, or, you know, the plot, is the marriage, which is between Jane and John. Very generic names. And John is just like a very charming guy. He's all that in like the a patriarchal society. You know, he's hot, he's attractive, he's charming, he's witty, and he's strong, and he's just like this like big dude, and he's just like a vibe. You know, like I bet if I met John in public, I'd be like, this man is fine AF. You know, and it's like he's a visionary and he's a charmer, and you know, the book starts out with that vibe of them being very attracted to each other, and it's very playful and it's whimsical. But as the relationship progresses, you get irritated by both of these characters. Both of them irritate me. Both of them get on my nerves. You know, when you first read through the book, at least in my experience, you would think like, oh, like poor Jane, you know, like why does this, like the whole marriage just sucks. Like John is very obviously a very jealous, insecure person who can't stand to see his partner especially do better than him, and he relies on his wits to get what he wants out of people. It's kind of giving like I don't know why, but it's kind of giving like the dad from the Glass Castle. I don't know why I thought of that, but he keeps a lot of empty promises, and they ping pong back and forth at the states because they live in New York and then they move to LA, they move to New York again, they move to LA, they move to San Francisco, then they move back to LA. Excuse me. And it's just like Jane goes through a lot, y'all. She has a kid and she watches the kid, and she's like taking care of the kid and whatnot, but she's also trying to maintain her career as a writer, but it's really hard because they're always moving and it drains her. And she's also being like a housewife, and she don't want to be a housewife, and like she's having to sacrifice, and it's just like I don't know how she keeps up with it. And I feel like they're both very frustrating people because they're both expecting the other person to be something that they are not. And the base of it all is that John is really not anything. Like he's kind of a jerk, if I'm gonna be honest. But also I feel like there's times where Jane's a little bit overly like, I don't know, it's just like, why don't you leave him, girl? Like that's the thing. I'm like, if you stay with him, you're enabling him. And it's like John receives no repercussions throughout the book. He goes through the whole book basically unpunished, and he receives no consequences. And even if he does, he still has the cushion of blaming his wife, taking it out on her, blaming her, getting frustrated with her, emotionally treating her like trash, if you know what I'm saying, the A word, and gaslighting her, manipulating her. And essentially, you know, she receives a lot of downfalls. You know, like if like there's financial issues, she refinances stuff, she deals with stuff, and she sorts it out, pulls money out of savings and whatnot. So it's like John receives little to no consequences, and that is just like a very frustrating thing to see John treat Jane so badly, but Jane enable it to a degree by either staying with him or making up for some of his downfalls because she herself is afraid of the stability because they're like so far along. So this book is just like a mess, y'all. Like it is really messy because this is a big spoiler. John had been having an affair the whole book, and like literally over half of it. And it's like there's this part like you don't even realize it because you as a reader start to figure it out with Jane, because there is this part where John's like, I want a divorce, and you're like, there's no way that he's asking for the divorce first. Do you see what I mean? Like, girl, like I thought Jane was about to divorce him, and I was actually like, girl, like you do your thing, like go ahead, divorce him. He ain't not anything. He sucks. He's not right for you. He's just a jerk, and we hate him. He's so bad for everyone. But he asks for the divorce, and then he immediately moves in with this other girl, Victoria, who was the wife of his best friend Felix. And you're just like, they're both homewreckers. They both suck. And it's funny because Jane's like the housewife, and then in Victoria's relationship, Felix is the house husband, if you will. Sorry, I need some ice cream. It's getting hot. And oh my gosh, y'all, like Jane finds old texts between John and Victoria, and they had been looking at houses together. And the ending, it's just like, you see how Victoria, like you can see that whatever relationship he has going on, Victoria is gonna end the same way, and you can only feel bad for Victoria. You're like, oh, you don't know what's coming for you. You don't know what's gonna happen to you. And I think that end of the book, it just ends with Jane at a karate lesson with her kid, and her relationship with her child is so cute, and it's very obvious that he sides with her, and I don't know, like there's just something very endearing about it. And the end of the book is just her at a karate class talking to another parent, like, you know what, this is very good for all of us. And then the mom's like, you know what, I agree, what have you been through, girl? And then you're just kind of like, oh, what are they about to talk about? You know what I'm saying? So the ending is a little bit heartfelt in that sense. It feels like it's not a happy ending, it's just like a breath of relief, like, oh, thank God you're at least out of that, you know, it's over. That's the best part. That's really the conclusion. And I really like this book because it isn't broken up into chapters. It's just like, you see this little line, it just ends, you know, and it's like written in chunks like that. There's no chapter 1, chapter 2. It's just like, I don't know. I thought that was interesting because I've never seen a book laid out like that. So that's Liars by Sarah Manguso. Okay, so the next book we have is Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs by Caitlin Doughty. The next 2 books are going to be about Caitlin Doughty because I love her, y'all. This book, out of the 3 that I read from her, I think this one's my least favorite just because it's not really plot based, and I think that I feel the same way about this one that I feel about the other book, From Here to Eternity, because it's more factual based. So this book is just, she got a bunch of questions from young children, and they asked her questions about mortality, about, you know, that good stuff. And so because of that, it's just more of like her answering questions. Her humor peeks out in a little bit in this one, and it's very sweet. I love the art style in the book, by the way. There's a bunch of drawings in it, and you can kind of see them. It's really something you have to see for yourself. I don't know if YouTube will allow me to show all of these, but it's just very sweet. And so, you know, like there is a question up here, she answers it with a few pages. So I think that if you want to get into her books and you have trouble focusing, this is a really good book to start because it's always changing. You know, there's a new question every other page, so it's not like she's going off the same thing over and over again. It's just like each other page is like a completely different story. So with that being said, that's why I really like this book. I don't really have many feelings about it. I feel like this, because the questions were answered by or asked by children, there's really not much in here that you as an adult might not know about, but it is fun to hear about like what children are curious about with mortality. There are some facts in here that you wouldn't have guessed are the case for a lot. I think that if you've read her other books, this book is more of like review. It's more of like, I think that if I was gonna turn things around and read from her again, I would start with this book, then go to From Here to Eternity, then go to Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. So that's really all I have for this book. This is Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs. It's cute. So the next book is From Here to Eternity by Caitlin Doughty as well. And this book, I don't really know how I feel about it. It felt very powerful. It felt very moving. And I have you say, so the plot of this book is that Caitlin Doughty has traveled to different parts of the world in order to explain different funeral customs and cultures and rituals. And it's very visceral. This book, all of her books that I read are extremely visceral. If you don't like the reading about like the human body, if you know what I mean, I would not recommend these books because they're a little bit gross in that sense. It's very vivid. And I love this book just feels very educational, and it really opened my heart and my brain because there's a lot of places that she goes to that I personally would probably never go to, and if I did, I would hate every second of it because I'm a spoiled little brat, and I grew up with running water, and you know, like I think that if I travel to these places, I would hate every second of it there, but after I leave, I'd really appreciate it. So that's the beauty of this. You get to read about that after part, and you get like the best part of the pomegranate, if you know what I'm saying. But she goes to a bunch of different places. Let me see which places she goes. She goes to Colorado, she goes to Indonesia, Mexico, North Carolina, Spain, Japan, Bolivia, California, and those are the places she goes to. Interestingly enough, my favorites to read about were Bolivia and Japan. I had no idea that Japan has such intricate funerary customs. They had like this whole thing about how, I forgot what it was called, but it's where the family, they cremate their beloved one, and they take an urn, and then they take chopsticks and pick up the bones of their loved one by one, and they start at the feet and then they move up, and it's like their loved one is stepping foot first into the afterlife. And there's just something about that that was very sweet and very beautiful. My mother is a Gen X Korean, and I don't think she would appreciate me doing like a Japanese custom to, you know, see her to the next life. If you get it, if you get it. If you don't, you don't. But anyways, another thing, the Bolivia one was very interesting because I don't know if it was Bolivia or Indonesia, but I'm pretty sure it was Bolivia. Let me see. Never mind, I was wrong. It was Indonesia. So in Indonesia, they did this thing where they would basically mummify their loved ones, and then they would take them out for a specific event, and then they would treat the body as if it were still living. And you know, they're still living. It's just like, you know, like, you know what I mean? Like biologically, these people are not here with us. And so they would dress them, they would clean them, they take care of them. And I think it was Bolivia that had like the skulls. So they decorated the skulls, and they had different powers in the sense that they would do, you know, they had a skull for good luck, they had a skull for money, one for career, for study. And it was very superstitious. I definitely think that the ones that travel more east are very, very superstitious. The ones in the States, you know, like North Carolina, Colorado, and whatnot, they're very basic, and you've probably heard of them, or at least they kind of make sense, and they're easier to keep up with because the language is a lot more relevant to the culture of the US. But the other ones, they definitely require you to, pay attention. I also really liked reading about Mexico because I feel like Mexico has such colorful and popular customs, you know, like the Day of the Dead, you know, like how do you say, like Dia de los Muertos. So that was very sweet, that was very endearing, and I loved reading about it. And it made me think of my roommate a lot because she's Mexican, and you know, her family, they take that holiday very seriously. So reading it in real time from another perspective was just very nice, and I liked learning about it. And it feels like you're traveling and you can feel yourself there, at least to me, because of the way that she describes it. You know, she explains her own feelings, you know, like not all the time is she comfortable exploring these places, because some of the places that she goes to, they're very hidden and very niche and very tucked away, in the sense that you can't just drive a car to some of these places. You know, you have to get on like a horse or like a carriage, and she goes through all of that. A lot of these places are villages, and you know, they don't really have the new world's technology and whatnot. And this book was published pretty when was it published? In like the late 2010s, so yeah, like 2018, 2017, I believe. So this book is relatively recent. So a lot of these cultures, like, it's very interesting to see how different worlds are if you've never traveled outside of the US. I've only been to Mexico, so reading about things, you know, in completely different continents, it's very fascinating, and it makes you think a lot, and it opened my mind, because it's just like, dang, like life is so different over here compared to literally every other country. You know, Japan's was really high tech. A lot of because they had like this thing, I forgot what it's called, but there's like crystal Buddhas in there, and you know, ashes are stored in a computer system, and when you can like not order them, but you can type it into a system, and it gives you the designated urn that has been dedicated towards the remains of your loved one. So it was just very high tech, versus other countries and other places are completely stripped back and they do everything by hand, whatnot. So I just think that this one, I love the title too, From Here to Eternity, and the cover is just so beautiful. And I do see myself rereading this again. I love Caitlin Doughty's books. I would reread this and Smoke Gets in Your Eyes over and over again. So that's From Here to Eternity. So the next book and the final book of Caitlin Doughty's is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematorium. If you asked me, what is your all-time favorite book? What is the book that if you could only read one book for the rest of your life, what would it be? This one. This, oh my gosh. I first read this back in 2021 or 2020. And I heard about it in this video from Goodnight Moon. It's funny because Goodnight Moon is a Leo, and then Caitlin Doughty is also a Leo. But I heard about it through one of her videos. You know, like the questionnaire was like, oh, what's a good book you read recently? She was like, oh, I really like this book. And I was just very intrigued because I felt like at that point I only read romance novels. So I decided to branch out and try this one. Best decision of my life. I think that if you first reading this book, it really messes with you because the book is a lot of lessons and a lot of experiences in the funeral industry, and it's very uncomfortable to read about grieving people, you know, like human bodies and whatnot. It's very visceral and it's emotional and it's scary because throughout the book you are constantly perpetually reminded of your mortality and how your time here is so limited and how the time of loved ones is very limited, and it gets dark. And she talks about her traumas of witnessing it first time, even as a little girl. And as she goes through the book, she talks about, you know, you can see how it has affected her and how it has impacted her personality and her feelings. But she also is like liberating herself in that sense because she's talking about it, she's being open about it, and she talks about how she wishes more people would be open about it even in times of difficulty, and how there's really no appropriate way to show up in grief, and that grief is grief. And it's just so, there's just parts of it where like, girl, you should not have said that. It's bold. Some of the stuff she says about the funeral industry and, you know, like mortality is bold, and I absolutely love it. And it's kind of gross sometimes, but I don't mind it. I loved it, and I love how she explains things, and it feels so genuine. And I feel like a lot of the time, especially now that in the American Western culture, she talks about how mortality is kept as a secret from us, and how funerary customs over in the West demand that we are denied all experiences with our own mortality, and how we don't talk about it, and how it stifles our relationship with our bodies, with other people, with our culture, and our ancestry, all of the above. And it's very sweet because I feel like it's like an intimate book in that sense. It feels like I'm looking at change in the face, and it's not as bad as you would think it would be. You know, after I read this book for the first time, I remember like for a month or two, I was just really depressed and really sad because it was hard. It was hard reading this book for the first time, especially because I was like 19, and it was a lot for me to take in. But at the same time, coming out of it, you feel like it feels like a reprieve from your own humanity, because I just feel like a lot of the time we get so caught up in what needs to happen, what we need to do next, that we ultimately forget that we're all going to the same place at the end of the day. And if you struggle with like existential crisis, or if you struggle with like your own mortality and whatnot, other people's mortality, I really recommend this book. It's gonna challenge your mind, but it feels like you're ripping off a band-aid before you're having to do it later on. And it makes you aware of something, and it feels really nice, and I can't describe it any other way. It just feels nice. And I love the titles, and let me see. Shaving Byron, Puppy Surprise, The Thud, Toothpicks and Jello, Push the Button. I think my favorite chapter is called Bublating, and it's funny because that's like the most visceral chapter of all. I didn't even realize. I just like the name Bublating. But you know, she talks a lot about her own experiences with being a woman as well, and how she was promised so many different things growing up. And there's parts of the book where she gets very frustrated with society, and you can see how working in the funeral industry took a toll on her too. And you as a viewer, or you as a reader, are going through it with her. But she ultimately chooses to keep going, and how there are circumstances that liberate her and continue to remind her that we're all in the same boat and that we're all going to the same place, but in not so much of a bad way. And I don't know, I feel like I could go on and on about this book. I feel like I have to either say it for 5 minutes or it'll be 5 hours. I love this book. It's my favorite book of all time. I see myself rereading it throughout my life, and I've reread it twice. So I read it again just recently, and then it was actually the book that got me back into reading, because I thought, oh, I really want to reread this book if I'm going to start. So I reread it, and I just loved it, and it felt really good to reread it too, because I feel like the first time I read it, because it's my first time having read anything but romance, at least on my own, it was a lot to keep up with. So rereading it, it made me feel like I was more aware and I could digest the content a lot more realistically, and I wasn't plagued by so many fears of the original fears I had when I first started the book back all those years ago, like 5 years ago. So it's just, I love it. I love it so much, and I think that Caitlin Doughty hit a home run with this one, and I hope one day I get to meet her. Man, that was Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. So the next book is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Y'all, this one is up there with Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Caitlin Doughty. This is also one of my favorite reads. I really recommend this one. Even if I tell you the plot and spoil everything, which I'm totally gonna do, it just is so eye-opening, and at the very least, it's a heartfelt story. At the very most, it is a huge metaphor for, our existence as a species and discovering our own strengths and what we are meant to do. It is the definition of we are all meant to do great things for our own self and putting meaning to your own life. So the book is about this boy named Santiago, and he is traveling from Spain to northern Africa because he has repeating dreams. He has 2 dreams about a treasure that is buried at the pyramids of Egypt. I'm gonna spoil the whole plot, y'all. And he goes to a gypsy, and he's like, oh, like, read my palm, or like, tell me about my dreams, you know, because she's like really good at that stuff. And then she's like, oh, like, you go over there, like, what can I say to you? Go get your treasure. And then he's like, man, like, I did not need to pay you or like do all that. Like, I'm just gonna go do it. And then he travels. He's a shepherd, so he sells all 60 of his sheep, and he goes to Egypt. And at first he meets someone who is gonna help him, but then he gets robbed and literally all his stuff is gone. But throughout the book, you'll notice that he goes through very difficult things, and he faces difficult things in the face. And he says to himself, I would rather perish going after my own personal legend, which is referred to throughout the book, and knowing that this is as farthest as any shepherd has ever gotten. I will perish happily knowing that. And there's just something that's so inspiring, because there are times where mortality and death look him in the face, and he just says, you know what, I'll take it, because I will have passed on pursuing what I wanted to pursue. And there's just something that's very like, it gives you chills, dude. It gives you chills. And he travels across the Sahara, he gets to the pyramids, but before that he does work at a crystal shop, and you know, that crystal shop's been struggling for a while, and his ideas help save it. So at that point, the shop's doing really well. He saves up a bunch of money. Then he goes to a desert, and he has a premonition about a war happening. And then they're like, oh, like, we'll give you until morning time, and if there's no war, we're gonna take your life. And so you can imagine how nerve-wracking the book gets sometimes, because this young man, he about to get on the chopping block just because he's so bold and he trusts his intuition. But every single time he ends up being right, and he gets money out of it. And then he meets the Alchemist, and I feel like the Alchemist is an interesting character, because the Alchemist is like very mysterious and kind of like frustrating. I kind of love him, and I feel like there's just so much that goes on this book. This book isn't really divided into chapters as well. It's just like a part 1 and 2. And there's just a lot that goes on. It's like Liars by Sarah Manguso, where it's just like, you're just reading, girl. Like, there ain't not no stopping. So it feels kind of hard to break up this book into chunks. It just feels like I have to tell you everything at one time. But along the way, he meets the Alchemist, and I feel like the point is that there's this other man that the boy meets, and it's just, I don't know, I can't describe it to you guys. There's just, you have to read it yourself. But before, the whole book is just about his journey to the pyramids. How about that? And then as he sets out into Egypt, he meets this, I forgot what his name was, but he was like this king or something, and he gave him these 2 rocks, and one was like white and one was black, and he would throw them in the pouch and he would shake them, and then he would throw them on the ground, and whichever rock came out would be his answer. So it was like a yes or no kind of thing. He rarely ever uses it. He only uses it like once, right when he gets robbed after being in Egypt. And then he moves forward, and then he meets this Englishman, I think. I forgot. Yeah, he meets this other guy who is seeking out the alchemist. Santiago was like, girl, I'm just looking for treasure. You can go ahead and meet your alchemist, whatever. But, you know, this Englishman, he also has, I don't know if it's an Englishman, I'm just calling him that, but he also has those rocks. So they have the same thing, or at least he knows about them. And then he's like, you know, like, side-eyeing Santiago because how do you know about that? Do you know about the alchemist? What do you know that I don't? And so the alchemist pretty much denies the Englishman because the Englishman wants to become an alchemist or learn the ways of alchemy so that he can turn different metals into gold or different materials into gold. So he's kind of doing it for like selfish purposes, whereas Santiago is moving specifically for his personal legend. And then he meets the alchemist takes him in and he trains him. And Santiago meets this girl, Fatima, in one of the oases, and he leaves her there to go travel to the pyramids to go get his treasure. And oh my gosh, y'all, I always forget to start the story off with this, but the beginning of the book, he's sleeping in this broken down church in Spain under a juniper tree. And when he, oh, I got chills. You guys, if you don't want spoiled, don't click off right now. So he goes to the pyramids and he's crying, and he finds a scarab beetle, like where his tears fall, a scarab beetle comes out. And you know, like, I'm sure we all know, but if you don't, scarab beetles are a sign of good fortune and like all sorts of nice things in Egypt. And so he's like, let me dig right here. So he digs right there. Another person comes up to him, and two guys rob him of everything. And then he's like, I'm looking for my treasure and they're buried in Egypt. I had dreams about it. Y'all don't understand. And then the guys are like, you're dumb. I had dreams about a treasure being buried under a juniper tree in a broken down church, and I never went because I don't believe in that stuff. And then you, as a reader, you're like, girl, no way. I literally got chills when I read that part, y'all. I was so like, there's no way. And before he had set out for the pyramids, or before he was 2 hours out, and he was with the alchemist and this guy who runs this monastery or like this church, or I don't know what it's called, but it's like a church thing. And the alchemist makes 4 pieces of gold. 3 of them, all 3 of them take one, but then there's an extra piece of gold that the alchemist leaves at the church, and the alchemist is like, girl, you got robbed like 2 times. It's gonna happen again, trust. And so after he finds the scarab and after he gets robbed again, he goes back to the monastery or whatever, and he gets his gold, and then he goes back to Spain, finds his treasure, and then the last line is him being like, I'm coming back, Fatima. And like, oh, that was just so good. My whole body, it felt like it was fizzing. I got so many goosebumps when I read this book. I so recommend it. Even though I just told you everything, I promise nothing could compare to actually reading it and feeling the experience. It is so amazing. And I see myself rereading this in the future a bunch of times. Everyone that I've met, or everyone who like talks about this book, they always say that they read this book a few times, and I'm about to be just like y'all. Or like what they be doing on TikTok, they be like, Paulo, Coelho, I don't know who you is, but let me tell you, you were spilling tea. That's The Alchemist, y'all. All right, so the next book is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. Excuse me. And this was a reread because I had actually read this book back in high school for English. And honestly, I had a copy that I got in the class, and I just didn't think I'd ever reread the book, so I donated it and I rebought it, and I really regret donating it. So every day I'm reminded why I shouldn't throw things away or get rid of things. I don't know. This is why I hoard. But this book is very intense. The book is basically about this girl, Nora, and how she unalives herself, and she just believes that there's nothing worth living for, and and by the way, there's like a lot of trigger warnings, so if like, you know, like all of that good stuff, so maybe I should have said that before, but she does that, and instead of actually just like passing away, she goes to this place called the Midnight Library, and it's like a purgatory. That's the best way to explain it. And there are invisible shelves full of green books. They're all green, and it's limitless. Like, you can imagine the library, there's no walls, and even the wall that she came in through, it was empty. And her wristwatch and everything, the clocks, they all said midnight, 0:00:00. And the librarian is Mrs. Elm, and Mrs. Elm is her teacher that she met in elementary school, and who was her librarian, not a teacher. And they used to spend time together after, you know, and when Nora's dad had passed away, Mrs. Elm was there to give the news to her and, you know, comfort her during such a difficult time. And Nora ends up doing what she does because she believes that life is just not worth living. You know, like, she gets fired from her job, her cat croaks, and, you know, like, all of her dates go wrong. She backs out of a marriage, and she just feels like she's messed up her life, and she feels like she's no good. And throughout the book, you start to realize that her relationship with her parents really made her that way, because her parents were very much like that. So it's a very realistic depiction of how we do become our parents, and how we oftentimes suffer the fate. And, like, you can tell that she was rebelling, and she was trying to break away from a curse or something. And I personally really like the jacket on this book. I don't really care for this, but, you know, because of that, you would just, like, she just goes to the library, and what happens is every single book is a completely different life. So, you know, what if she had done Olympic swimming like her dad wanted her to? What if she had done this, or like pursued doing band with the Labyrinths with her brother she wanted to? And it was all very, you know, it was difficult. And she goes through all of these lives, and throughout, that's pretty much the plot of the book, where she tries a bunch of different lives, and she's just like, each life she's very unsatisfied, and she's not happy. Even a life where she settles into, where she is really happy, and she starts feeling everything fading, you know, like her past life, the Midnight Library, she comes back from that life, and she was like, I was happy there. But then at the end of the book, the library starts crumbling down, and starts breaking down, and she has to write in the future book. There's a book that is unwritten, and it is basically about her future, and she just scribbles in it, I'm alive, and she goes back, and she comes back, and everything goes right. Literally, if she had stayed in her life for 5 more minutes, everything starts going right, and things start falling back into place. And me personally, I just feel like that was just like a very nice book to read. I really loved it, because when I go through difficult times, I like to imagine that I will get my 5 minutes, my 10 minutes, where things start to go in my favor and things start to work out. And there's just something about that is so liberating and so sweet. And she ends up going to visit Mrs. Elm at the end of the book. And, you know, like, the Mrs. Elm in the library wasn't real. Like, it was just like a figment. There's like a lot of talk of like quantum physics in this book, and I don't understand quantum physics. But if y'all understand that, you're gonna have an easier time understanding it than I did, because I was like talking about some quantum physics. I was like, girl, I just know, like, what's his name, Isaac Newton, he said ball roll, ball means rolling. When ball rolling, it means ball is rolling. So I'm like, okay, period. You know, like, he said the third law, I just heard ball rolling means ball rolling. So kinetic energy vibes. But, you know, she goes back, and the book ends with her playing chess with Mrs. Elm. And it was just so cute, because when she was a little girl, they used to play chess together. So there's a lot of like full circle moments in this book. And the whole point of the book is being kind, and how that can deeply impact another person's life, and how the life that you're living now is exactly where you're meant to be. Because in every other life, it's only so good, and it's only as pleasant as it is because you have lived it, not because it is a good life, you know? And there's just something about that that's just so sweet, because I feel like throughout the book, so one thing that I used to criticize the book about was that when she get transported to another life, she would come in as if she is her from her root life, her original life that you start reading about when you first start. And at first I was just like, that makes no sense, because obviously you're not going to like the lives that you transport into, because you're coming in with a different perspective, you know? And it's just like, maybe if she would go into these lives having felt like she lived the life, she would like it more. But then that was like the part I was like, oh, life is good and where you are is good because you have lived it up until that point, not because it is good. I don't know, y'all. This really good book. It's one of the few books I have in hardcover that I read recently, and I prefer paperback more, but this book was very beautiful, and I see myself rereading this a few times too, and I think that anyone who may be going through a tough time should read this book. But even then, it's just like a really solid read, and I really like it too because the chapters are not so, it's like this, where it's like a name, and then it's not like chapter 1, chapter 2. I really like books that do that because it makes it easier to keep up with it, and it makes it more enjoyable to read, at least for me. So that's Midnight Library by Matt Haig. All right, so the last book that we have is 3 Summers by Margerita Liberaki. If you watched my horoscope from the other day, you would know that I just recently finished this book. And this book, it's also very loaded, and I see myself having to or wanting to reread it because I definitely feel like the next time I read it, I'm going to catch on a lot of details that I missed. And this book is like, you have to pay attention, y'all. You cannot just like, I don't know how y'all be reading, but I would imagine you're a lot better than me because I have a hard time focusing when I'm reading, and I'll just like skim through things and I know what's going on, but I'll miss like a few words and details. So either I reread or I like put it together. It's like how I kind of listen to people when people are talking to me. Like, I'm not fully paying attention to you, but I do hear bits and pieces, and I'm able to chalk up conclusions and kind of determine what you're talking about. But this book, you cannot. You have to read every single word. It's very important. And the book is just about 3 summers in Greece between 3 sisters. And the first chapter talks about how they had a Polish grandmother and they bought big straw hats when they were really young. And then you see them grow up throughout the book. And then at the end, they talk about, like, maybe one day we'll do that again, wearing straw hats. And if I had to be honest, I really wish I read this book when I was younger. I feel like, because this book came out like the 90s, I think. And I feel like rereading this book every summer is going to be like a thing for me. I feel like I'm genuinely going to do that. But it was just so beautiful. And there's really no plot to it. It talks about just the summers and how they grew up, The 3 sisters are Katerina, the youngest, Infanta, the middle, and Maria, the oldest. And then the mothers, Anna, and then Anna's sister, Aunt Teresa, and then their grandfather, and then the Polish grandmother, and then Demetrius, which is the dad's or the grandfather's friend. And then there's like other families involved because like the girls marry and whatnot. And I think my favorite character was Infanta. I feel like her relationship with Aunt Teresa was just kind of like all over the place, and I didn't really like it because Aunt Teresa struggled with some stuff. Like, she's been through some stuff, y'all. Like, she's been pushed into doing things that she didn't want to do by men. And so because of that, she projects a lot of this onto Infanta, and I feel bad for Infanta because she essentially is having to like be like the one that goes through Aunt Teresa's trauma with her because like they spend a lot of time together, and like at the beginning of the book you just notice that they are always together, and that was just kind of like them. You didn't know much about Infanta. Infanta is easily the most mysterious character out of every single person in the book, but as you read more you start to learn more about her, and you really find out that she's just so going through middle child syndrome where she gets put through other people's stuff, but she is the strongest out of the 3 of them. She's the bravest, and she likes riding horses, so the book is told from mostly Katerina's perspective, and Katerina just gets off on stressing out their mama, y'all. Like this, they just like, I thought it was so funny because there were just certain parts of the book where they would say things, and I'm like, girl, you did not just say that. Because I remember Katerina would like do something, her mom would be like, can you stop? And then she'd be like ignoring her, and then you would read, mother really hates it when I'm indifferent, so I wanted to specifically annoy her. And then she would do it again, and then her mom would be like, you're impossible, like she screamed. And it was so funny because I'm like, girl, why you love stressing out your mama? And it's just like very obvious that she wants attention and love and whatever from her mother, and she gets it by irritating her. And Maria goes through a lot of changes in the books. Maria starts out as like this fun person, like she's just all over the place. And not that when she has kids or like gets married, like she's not a fun person, but you know, it's like she's more adventurous, she's more spunky, she's a lot more spontaneous, you know, like she out here, like she's sleeping and she like living life and she's just brave and she don't care, like she just doesn't care. And then there's a certain point where she does get married and she has kids. The end of the books you read when she's like on her second child, and then you're just like, you know, she changes a lot. She becomes a lot more caring, a lot more slower, a lot more modest, and a little bit more fragile. Whereas Infanta becomes more and more vivid throughout the book, and Katerina also becomes more vivid and more frustrated. Katerina honestly grows more and more angrily throughout the book, and how she feels kind of left out because she's the youngest. But yeah, Infanta was my favorite, and I also really liked Aunt Teresa and also Mrs. Perigori. Mrs. Perigori is the mother of Maria's husband. So it is their mother-in-law, and her name's Laura. And that was another thing about the book. It was really hard to keep up with all the names, y'all. Like, I only started getting it down by like the second summer. Like the third summer is when I really understood everything. The first summer, I was lost. And, you know, Mrs. Perigori, she was like a dreamer. She was like really inconsistent. She kind of made no sense. And she was just like a daydreamer. And she was just always a little bit aloof. And then there's this part where Aunt Teresa's, they're all talking smack about her. And tell me why Aunt Teresa's like, and the way she dresses, she insists on being different from other women. And I just don't understand it. And I thought that was so funny because basically what she's saying is, why does she want to be different so bad, you know? And I was just like, girl, you did not have to say that. And I feel like it was funny just because it was like written in that like classy language where she's like, she insists on being different. And it's just like, why she thinks she's like all that. I don't know. You can tell that Aunt Teresa is like a very bitter person, and her character is just very awkward and very judgmental and very like, I don't know, like what is going on with her? But you know, she's traumatized, so you get it. But yeah, I really like this book, and I feel like it's just like a nice mindless read in the sense that I wouldn't read this for the plot. I would just read it because it feels like you're spending time with these people, and it feels like someone is like telling you a story and relaying the good times in their life. And I feel like if I read this when I'm older, I will bust out crying, y'all. I'm like 22, so I still have a whole life to live ahead of me. But there will be a certain point where I'm grown and I have way more responsibilities, and reading this book will make me cry because summers as a kid don't hit like the summers now as an adult. As a kid, I'm like, hey, yo, like no school, I'm going out, I'm buying stuff with the money that isn't mine, but it is also mine. And now I'm grown and I'm like, dang, summer is hot and I'm working and I want to go home and sleep. But you know, and there's just something that's very sweet. And the book, the language is so vivid. You feel like you're there. They be talking about some cherries. They be talking about some strawberries, like lavender and like the sun setting, the meadow. Like you feel like you're there. And the book takes a lot of time because I feel like there's no like main plot line, or there isn't like a, you know, there is a plot, but it's not like you're working towards something. It's just like they're telling a story. And because of that, the book takes a lot of time to explain details, and it feels like you're savoring it, and it's divine. It literally feels like a picnic of cherry tomatoes. I don't know, it's just so sweet. I wanted to like buy linen clothes and go out and eat strawberries in the sun in the grass overhanging a cliff just because of this book. It's something else. Okay, that's what I have. This was 3 summers. Okay, so I usually don't do outros, but for this video, I feel like it's appropriate, especially if you've watched the whole video through and through. So if you did that, thank you, I love you. But those are the books that I have read in this past period since when I started reading. It's a lot. Oh my gosh. I cannot believe I read all these. But I don't know what got me into reading. I just feel like I was watching so many content videos, or like so much content revolving around reading, and I really wanted to try it myself and it's been a nice escape for me because I feel like I overthink a lot, or I'm always thinking about other things. Excuse me. And I feel like not only do I write a lot because I'm doing horoscopes and, you know, because I keep a diary, I love writing and I love like reading too, and I feel like this is a nice way to replenish the energy that I'm constantly and perpetually exerting through doing work and, you know, always having to use my mind for stuff. And I feel like it's just a nice way to enrich my imagination, because I really enjoy reading. Like, I love reading posts and blogs and stuff, so I just feel like this has been a nice little thing for me, and it's just good for me, and I really love it. And I'm really glad that everyone else is so inspired by me reading, because like that's what got me into reading, watching people who are always reading. I love watching Haley Jean ASMR and Mauve ASMR because they talk a lot about the books that they've read. There's other, you know, I'll scroll on TikTok and I'll see videos of like book talk or whatever, but I think book talk's just like trendy, and it's just like I don't like it. But on YouTube, like, you can really find some good people that know what they're reading and whatnot. So I highly recommend their videos if you want good book recommendations, because a lot of these books I found through them, and or like through videos I've seen online. So I think YouTube is just a really nice place to surf, and I hope that maybe some of you have read these books. If you have, tell me about them. If not, and you're okay with reading them even though I spoiled it, I hope that you'll read them, and I hope that all of you enjoyed this video. And thank you so much for the people who were in support of it. I'll see you in my next video. I love you.